Hopefully we're live. I'm just going to refresh my page. If you can see me, can you hit the like button please, so that I know that it's definitely working. And I can invite you to my fire then. Nothing's come up as yet, but I'm hoping that it just takes a few minutes just to get itself sorted out. It did last summer anyway. Yeah, it's live. I can see someone's watching. That's probably my mum. Thanks, Mum. Brilliant. If you are watching and you can see me, can you hit the like button, please? Because then I can see that it's working and you can hear me and everything's going right. Yeah, it's looking good. I am actually sat at the bottom of the garden. And it is pouring with rain and it is really windy, but it's okay. I guess the only things that could go wrong are bits falling on me, or I've put pine wood on the fire which is spitting at me, so, but that's hopefully atmospheric and it won't suddenly set me on fire whilst I'm telling everyone a story. We've got 2 people watching now. Give us some likes so that I can see that it's working, and I'm going to open it up as well on my screen on my computer down here so that I can talk to people. And thank you, that's my tea arriving. Amazing. Thanks very much. Well, welcome to Wednesday evening, Wednesday the 20th. I'm Pridie Tiernan and I am, I guess, many things. My brain is a bit fuddled today by all the home education that we're doing at the moment and the millions of other things that we're trying to do too. And I bet there's loads of people out there doing that every day as we speak, just like me, and you'll know that feeling of just peace that comes over you when you finally find yourself a small space somewhere at home and you can just breathe deeply and relax and connect. You know, this is really awesome, being able to connect like this and talk to each other through all this tech. This is the nice side of tech, isn't it, rather than feeling like we're getting a bit too much screen time when we're trying to do the schooling bit or the work bit. So my name's Pridie Tiernan, like I said, and I'm a teacher and a storyteller and an outdoor instructor and someone who spends as much of her life as she possibly can outside and telling stories. And if I can combine the two, then that's what I do. All of my work is aimed at combining the wild and the words, because, well, I read this really beautiful quote recently in a book called Hag, and it was just spot on. It was just brilliant. It just said, you know, the modern world still holds on to its magic if we can attune ourselves to its enchantments. And you know, that for me rings true when I'm outside in the wild. Not necessarily the wild, I mean in lockdown when I'm just walking to the park. You know, there is magic there. If I can just connect with, you know, the stuff that is so enchanting about the outside world. And stories, of course, you know, they're there to enchant you, and they certainly do bring an element of magic to my life, and I hope to your life this evening as well. As I speak, I'm going to try not to be quite so supercharged as I was for that preview video last week. I apologise for that. I think we all get a bit hysterical at the moment, don't we, when we're, you know, running such highs and such lows and we're on this big roller coaster. But I'm going to try and stay nice and calm and nice and chilled out and enjoy sharing some of my favourite tales with you this evening. I'm going to look down here and just see who I've got joining me, just so yay, Tasha's here with me, brilliant. Oh, brilliant, thank you, thanks so much. Great, so I know you're here and I know that it's all working. And I'm going to have to tell you some stories, I think. Thank you so much to Michael and Somerset Storyfest for having me on. It's an absolute privilege to tell tales alongside some incredible storytellers that I adore watching and most definitely look up to. It's really nice to be here on this forum as part of this family telling stories. And when Michael asked me to tell some, I had to think, oh, you know, what are the ones that I want to share with everybody? Because it's January, and January feels like the beginning of the new year. It's important that the stories I share are reflecting on what's just gone by, but they're full of hope and that sense of renewal and a chance to heal and rest and recuperate, and things are going to get better. So I thought long and hard, and I consulted my agents, obviously, of 5 and 7 years old respectively, and asked them what I should tell. And they came up with 3 that felt just totally right. The first is a First Nations tale. I think they chose that because just before the pandemic, we were lucky enough to go travelling up the northwest coast of America, and when we were up in Canada, we were grabbing hold of whatever books and texts we could that had First Nation tales in, and we'd spend hours and hours of an evening just sat around a fire like the one I'm sat next to right now, and we'd be reading these stories and sharing these legends together. And the girls and I really loved the fact that nature and people, they were one and the same, because we are nature, of course. And these First Nation tales felt like they were connecting us with the natural world when we were listening to them. So my first story is going to be The Curing Fox. And I think actually, rather than go through them now, I think I'll start with that first story, and I'll talk about each one a little bit beforehand, before I share it. So this story is called The Curing Fox, and it's a story that I first came across not when we were reading the books up the northwest coast, but when I was listening to an incredible podcast by the wonderful Nana Tomova, a Bulgarian storyteller, and she was sharing it on her Story Apothecary, because she felt very strongly, and I certainly agree, that this story is just really right for the times that we find ourselves in. So if you're sitting comfortably, I will tell you a tale. Once upon a time, there was a little girl, and this little girl fell ill during a bitter, hard winter. She developed a cough, and her chest was sore, and she was finding it difficult to breathe. Her parents, obviously very worried about her, covered her with blankets and with furs, and put her to bed with the fire high beside her. Now nothing seemed to help, and she became worse and worse. And so they called for the wise woman of the village. Now the wise woman of the village had a wonderful name. She was called Duck Egg, and she was a healer. And she came straight away, and she looked at the girl, and she went over to her, and she bent down, and she placed her ear against her chest, and she spent some time listening. And the girl's chest rose and fell, rose and fell, rose and fell. And Duck Egg, after a time, looked up, and she said to the parents, "I can hear a she-fox. I can hear a she-fox limping across the snow, for she is injured. I can hear her. Well, the girl's father was a hunter, and he stepped forward and he said, "I can find this fox. I can go and I can bring this fox back to you. Is that what we need?" And Duck Egg nodded. She said, "Yes, we need this fox. We need her. We need you to go out into the snow and the bitter winter, and we need you to find her and bring her back to us, alive and well." And so the hunter left. He put on his snowshoes and he stepped out into the freezing cold and snowy landscape. And off he went. Now, after a time, he spotted that fox, and he started to creep closer and closer towards her, and the fox spotted him. And the fox was watching him, moving away, never letting him get quite so close, but wondering what he was doing, following her. And back in the village, old Duck Egg bent down and listened to the little girl's chest again. And she listened hard, and she could hear a crackling noise. And she looked up and she said, "Your father has stopped, and he is cold and he is tired, and he is lighting a fire," as indeed the hunter was, for it was nearing now the end of the day. And as that fire grew hotter for the hunter, as he sat watching the fox watching him from a distance, but him able to warm himself just a little, back in the village, Duck Egg turned to the mother and said, your daughter will be hot tonight. She will have a fever." And it was exactly as she said. The child did run a fever that night. The hunter, as soon as the night had passed, was on his feet again and following that fox. Now the fox was injured. The fox was limping across the snow. She was easy to track. You could see her footprints. You could see where the swish of her tail in the snow had moved. And it wasn't long before the hunter was able to catch her. He grabbed that fox and he held her close, and her little heart was beating so fast. And back in the village, Duck Egg bent down and listened again to the girl's chest. "I could hear the fox's heart beating," she said to the mother, "and it's beating fast. And your daughter's heart is beating fast as well. The hunter has the fox. He will be home soon." The hunter lost no time in returning to the cabin. It took him a whole other day to get back, but at last he and the injured fox arrived. He stepped into the cabin, cradling the fox carefully so as not to hurt her any more. And as soon as he entered, Duck Egg said, put her down on the bed by the child and cover her with blankets." The fox by now was so frightened and so weak, she didn't move, she didn't complain. She lay there on the bed next to the child. The child too was weak, was feeling really very poorly, and almost didn't really notice that a small little fox had been brought in and placed upon her bed. She knew there was something there, and she knew that it was good. Now Duck Egg said, "Get some meat. Let us feed this fox. Let us help heal her. Let us make her better." And so the mother and the father went and got some meat, and they brought it back, and the fox gobbled it up. She might be tired and she might be weak and she might be injured, but if someone offers you meat when you're a wild fox, you gobble it up. And so Duck Egg said, "Now feed the fire some more logs. Make sure the room is warm. Keep them covered in blankets and let them sleep now." And that's what the parents did. They let them sleep all night together like that. Now in the morning, when everyone woke, and I say everyone, I mean the mother and the father and Duck Egg, they saw that the little fox was lying at the end of the bed, but her eyes were wide open and her eyes were bright. And Duck Egg nodded and she said, "Go open the door." And so the father got up and he went and he opened the door of the cabin, and the fox sprang from the bed and ran outside, disappearing off into the whiteness. For she was healed. She was better. She was no longer limping. And the child? Well, just as that fox leapt off the bed and ran across the room and out of the door, the little girl opened her eyes too. And her eyes were bright as well. For this little girl was better. Now Duck Egg waited a while, for everyone was very happy, and the mother and father wanted to sit with their daughter. But after a time, she had one final thing to say. She said, "Before I leave, I just want to ask you this. Did the fox heal the little girl? Or did the little girl heal the fox? So I'm going to have a peek at my computer screen down here now and take a sip of water and see whether or not anyone's got an answer for me. Who healed who? Little girl, heal fox, fox, heal little girl. What do you think? It's a story that feels obviously really relevant at the moment because of the pandemic and people being poorly and their chests hurting and having coughs. But for me, it feels like it's an extra special story because it's talking about nature having a place in our lives where healing has to occur. And it feels like, you know, if we reach out to that natural world, and I imagine many of you have been doing that, and certainly were doing it last year when the weather was beautiful, you know, it can heal us through giving us a sense of time away from all the anxiety, from providing for us a distraction, you know, the fresh air. There's all the science behind it, isn't there? The chemicals in your brain that are released when you're out in the air and you're out in the light, and how important that is to do it still now, even when it's really windy, like it's gusting up to 40, isn't it, today or tonight, and raining so hard. Just to be outside, take time outside. And I think I love First Nations tales for that reason. They often blur those boundaries between people and animals, and reminding us that we all are part of nature, and that, you know, working together, connecting, having that relationship together means that we have a capacity to heal each other as well. And a peek down, see if anyone's... I've got it. Michael says that the fox healed the little girl, and that's exactly what my daughters think as well. They think that the fox is the absolute hero in this story. Belief and kindness, Saoirse has said, and a mutual healing from Jackie, which is lovely. And Archie reckons that they healed each other, so that's beautiful. Thank you everybody. So another story then, because I'm with you for 50 minutes, which is a real blessing for me. I hope that it feels like it is for you too. So my second story I came across when I was listening to a podcast called The Fair Folk. I'm sorry, teachers do this. They try and they tell everyone what they're reading and listening to because they love to share the things that they're learning from. Anyway, this is a podcast by Danica Boyce, and she was talking to a storyteller, a Scottish storyteller called Daniel Allinson. And he was talking about one of his favourite stories that he'd been told when he was being tutored and coached when he was younger. And it's a story called The Dreammakers, and it's a Scottish folk tale. And the reason why I want to share this one is because when they were talking on the podcast about it, what really hit home is the fact that they said, you know, this story is about staying still for a period of time, you know, hibernating, and using that time to learn or to grow in strength, or, you know, to spend it wisely. I don't know, maybe not wisely, but just to take time to appreciate what you gain when you are forced into a situation where you have to spend time cut off from things. And of course I love it because I spend half my life in the mountains, and it's about mountains, and we all spend our lives here in my family stuffing our faces with bilberries, and it's to do with stuffing your faces with bilberries. So I'm going to share this second story with you, and it's a Scottish folk tale, and it's called The Dreammakers. One day, a group of young women were out picking blaeberries. And they were picking and eating some of them and staining their faces purple. But there was one young woman who became so involved in what she was doing that she ended up climbing higher and higher and higher, and away from the rest of the group. In fact, she'd strayed so far away from the rest of the group that she was pretty much lost. She didn't realise at first. It wasn't until she suddenly felt that it was a bit colder. There was a bitter wind around her, and and that suggested that she'd climbed higher up into the mountains. And so she paused with her berry picking, and she looked about her, and she called, and she wondered where they'd gone. And that's when she realised that she was lost. She'd lost the group, and she'd managed to lose herself up here in the mountains. Now, this young woman had grown up in the mountains, and she knew that it wasn't a safe place to be on your own, especially not because, you know, the day was getting on and it was going to get colder and darker. She began to get quite worried because she knew that the higher you went in the mountains, the more risk there was that you would fall over a cliff or slip down a gully. And to make matters worse, and is the case often with mountains, a mist was blowing in on the breeze. And that mist very quickly, rolling down the mountainside, blowing in from the sea, became quite thick. And our young woman found herself stood all alone on the mountainside with a basket full of berries, but in the thick mist and all alone. And she wasn't sure, but it seemed like there were some ghostly shapes there in the mist. And in fact, actually, as she looked harder, it seemed like these ghostly shapes were growing in number and they were coming closer. But it's very windy in the mountains, and a wind came along just at the right time, and it blew some of the mist aside, and it revealed that she was not alone on the mountain, in fact, as she had thought, but instead, actually, she was with some deer. Now, these deer, she could see, were coming down the mountain track, and they were there in front of her. And they were hinds, they were female deer with calves at heel. So she didn't feel frightened. But it seemed like they were looking at her. It seemed like they were trying to suggest maybe that she went with them. She felt like maybe this was a safe thing to do, this was a good idea. They didn't seem at all uneasy with her there. So she started to walk up the track, up the mountain, higher and higher, with the deer. And the deer were very happy to lead the way. Now, after a time of them pausing to graze and travelling slowly up this mountainside, they came to a meadow. And the meadow sort of sat, rested in the col between two summits. And the ground opened up, and the deer wandered off. They started to break apart and graze, completely at ease, on the mountainside in this meadow. Now, the young woman looked about her and saw that there was in fact a cave. She went straight over to the cave and she looked inside, and inside were sat an old man and an old woman. Really old, you know, old as ancient as the hills themselves. And they looked up as she appeared there, and she stepped forward into the light, and she saw that they were both sat in front of and had been looking into a pool of water on the floor of the cave. Because this elderly couple, this old man and this old woman, well, they were in fact the makers of dreams. Let me explain. She told them her story. She offered them her berries. She said, "Please, may I stay one night? May I shelter here, and tomorrow I'll find my way back down the mountain." And the old woman stood up and she said, "Shelter for one night I cannot provide, but if you would stay with me for a year and a day and help me, for I grow old, help me with the work that I must do, then I will have the deer take you back down the mountain. And if your work with me is honest and true, I will give you a reward." Well, the young woman agreed to stay with them, and she worked really hard alongside the old woman. She worked night and day with her. They'd be out with the deer, they'd be milking the deer, they'd be making this cheese that they call Pridie. And she'd be going out and she would be collecting herbs, meadowsweet, thyme, mint. And then the old woman would be drying the herbs over a fire made out of dried heather. And they'd be putting the herbs into the hind's milk to make that Pridie cheese. Now, when the cheese was made, well then that's when the magic happened. Because they would give the cheese to the old man, and the old man would fashion the cheese into shapes. He would fashion them into the shapes of the things that he saw when he was looking in that pool, when he was staring into the pool that was on the floor of the cave. Because he was seeing dreams in that pool, and he was making dreams into shapes, tangible shapes, objects. And he'd take these dreamy, cheesy shapes outside of the cave just as the day was ending and the sun was setting, and he'd hold them up so that they could take on all the colours of the sky. And then he would hold them out. Now in his right hand, he would always hold those that were true dreams. And he would hold them up, and the wrens and the larks and the falcons would fly down, and they would take them from his hand, and they would fly off with them and give them out in the world. But in his left hand held false phantoms. In his left hand, he held the nightmares. And he would hold them up, and the crows and the ravens would come down, and they would take them from him, and they would take nightmares out into the world. Now, she stayed with this elderly couple for a year and a day, just as they had asked. And then when her time had finished there, the old woman said, "Your service has indeed been good and honest and true, and you have worked so very hard alongside me. You have learnt so much." She said, "Follow the deer now, follow them back down the mountain, and there your reward shall be." So she bid them farewell, and off she went, down the mountain. But when she got down to where the mountain meets the seashore, the hinds didn't seem to want to let her walk off along the shore and towards home. Instead, they seemed keen that she stayed where she was, right on the edge, almost in the surf itself. They wanted her to look out to sea. They formed a circle around her, and so she stood looking as they seemingly wished her to do. And after a time, she saw someone rowing towards her. And the harder she looked, the more she could see. And she noticed that it was a young man with golden hair wearing a golden torque. And he was paddling towards her, and he came right up to the shore, and he climbed out of his boat, and he came up to her, and he took her by the hands, and he looked into her eyes, and he said, "Lady, I have dreamed of you. And I've come to ask if you will return to me, to the halls of my father the king, and to ask if when I am king you will be my queen." And you know what? She wasn't silly, so she said yes. And she went back with him to his island, and she ruled when his father died alongside him as the queen. And she taught their people all about their dreams, and they grew wondrously wise. But now, sadly, much is forgotten. And that's how the story ends. And that's a very interesting story as well, isn't it? Because, you know, that you see, perhaps, I hope you see anyway, why I've said it's so powerful in the sense that she doesn't mean to end up in this cave, and she doesn't mean to end up stuck in this place, but, you know, she does. And it turns out that she ends up stuck in a place where there's two older people there that can tutor her, can teach her, can show her stuff that is truly magical, that she might never have even imagined went on or existed. And some say, in fact Daniel says in his, and I've got a great big, sorry I was distracted slightly there by a massive load of rain that just fell on my head. Daniel says in his podcast, when he's talking to Danica Boyce, he says that when you're hiding away, it's almost like it's a time to apprentice yourself to something. You know, this is the time that we can use to really grow. And he says also actually that in some versions of the story, the island that the girl goes to, that the woman goes to with the prince, is the island of the eternally young. And that's quite a nice idea in some ways, but actually if you sit and have a chat with somebody about that, I'm not sure that if you went back in to be with other people and they were growing old whilst you were still remaining young, that's not always a blessing. But maybe if it's an island where everyone's remaining young and they don't get old and they don't get poorly and they're never injured, maybe that truly is a blessing and not a curse in disguise, which is sometimes the case of fairy tales. So I'm going to glance down here again and see if anyone can tell me, you know, what they make of that story. What do you think that story is teaching you? Why? I mean, does it feel appropriate for January? Was that the right kind of story to tell? I'm going to have let's have a look. Okay, so a few people have joined us. Hello to those people. I'm also, just whilst I'm taking a brief pause, just going to put another log on the fire because I'm sat right next to my fire here, and it's been doing a really good job of smoking me out there. And now the elements really are against me, but it's okay because I'm wearing the right kit, so it's fine. I can stay outside. And I hope that it's managing to somehow bring inside for you the outdoors and give you that sense of being around a campfire with me. I feel like I've got lots of people with me, which is really nice. So yeah. Right. I reckon I ought to tell my third story. My third story and my final story. This is a bit longer than these two stories. So The Curing Fox and The Dream Makers are nice sorts of stories to tell when you're out for a walk. I run story walks for people. Other storytellers I know do this as well, where I guide people around places that are outside, wild spaces, sort of the kind of untamed spaces. Sometimes that's mountains, big scary mountains, and sometimes that's just walking in local woods and forests. And I tell stories, so I connect those places to stories that I know, stories that I've heard. A lot of folklore, so if I'm walking past certain trees, then I'll start talking about the tree, the folklore that's connected to it, and the stories, you know, that are connected to that folklore as well. That's great fun to do. But I also as well run retreats. So with a good friend of mine, we run She Can Do Wild. Big shout out to Holly Redfern there. And She Can Do Wild is all about bringing women together to enjoy a bit of bushcraft and be outdoors and rest and relax, recuperate, have that connection with nature, learn to do things that are practical, but also that give you a sense of relaxation and peace. And there's lots of storytelling and singing, and it's really beautiful. So I'm missing being able to do all those things, as I'm sure lots of people are. And being here with everybody, you know, gives me that sense of people being together and doing stuff like that. So this story is one of our favourite fairy tales, and I'm certain that some people that are listening and watching and are with us now, I'm certain that some of you, many of you will know this story. And if you don't know this story as such, you'll know stories that lie within it that are older. You'll recognise them, especially if you know your Greek myths. It's called East of the Sun and West of the Moon. And the reason why I wanted to tell it tonight is because, you know, I've had a story about healing, I've had a story about hibernation, and all these things are going on with lockdown, and all of these things are really important. But during the week, at least once, I have to have a story that inspires me, you know, that contains strength, that has in it a sense of no matter what you throw at me, I'm still going to achieve, I'm still going to do it, I'm still going to manage, I'm going to find a way to get through things. And you might be relentless in trying to knock me down, but I'm going to carry on. A bit like the rain that's falling on my head in the gap between the shelter that I've got above me and the little cabin that I've sat in here. So East of the Sun, West of the Moon is a story that was collected by Asbjørnsen and Moe, and it's a Scandinavian folktale. So we've had First Nations, Scottish, and now we're having Scandinavian folktales. And it's just really beautiful. And it's a fairy tale, and I feel like we need some magic. So, if you're sitting comfortably, I'm going to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there lived a poor husbandman. He had so many children that he had barely the means to feed nor clothe them. He loved every one of his children, but his favourite by far was his youngest daughter. Because she was strong, brave, and full of the spirit of adventure. Now one evening, it was late in the fall of the year and the weather was cruel and wild outside. The wind blew, as you can hear it here, and the rain fell, and the walls of the cottage shook. The family was sat around the fire, doing this and that, when there came a tap, tap, tapping at the window. So the father got up and he went to answer the door to see what the matter could be, who could be out on a night like this. And when he opened that door, he found himself stood in front of a great white bear. And the great white bear spoke. It said, "Good evening to you." And the man replied, "Good evening to you, sir." And then the bear said, "I have come for your youngest daughter. If you would give her to me, I will make you as rich as you are now poor." Well, the man should not be sorry at all to be so rich, but he loved his youngest daughter. She was his favourite. He paused a while and then he said, "Let me go and ask her." So he returned to the fire and he said to his youngest daughter, he said to that lassie, "There is a bear outside who asks if you will go with him, and if you do, he will make us as rich as we are now poor. What will be your answer, daughter?" Well, our lassie said no. She said, "Father, I love you so. Why would I want to go?" And so the man returned to the bear and he said, "My daughter says nay, but if you return in 7 days' time, well, we'll see what she says then." So the bear leaves and 7 long days pass. 7 days for the family to keep reminding the daughter that the bear did say that he would make them as rich as they are now poor. 7 days where the weather was still cruel and wild, and the rain fell, and the wind blew, and the walls of the cottage still shook. But after 7 days, that bear, well, he did return. There was a tap, tap, tapping at the window, and the father went to open the door. "Good evening to you," he said to the white bear. "Good evening to you, sir," said the white bear back. "I have come for your youngest daughter. If you would give her to me, I will make you as rich as you are now poor." "What is her answer this time?" he said. And so the father went to answer nay, believing it to be the same answer as it was last time. But our lassie, well, she stepped forward out of the shadows and she stood up to the bear and she said, "Actually, my answer is that I will. I will come with you." And the bear looked down at her and he said, "Are you afraid?" And she said, "No, I am not afraid." And he said, "Good. Then climb upon my back and hold tight to my shaggy coat, for there's nothing to be afraid of." And off they went. I really hope that the weather wasn't as bad for them when they were travelling as it is right now out here in my garden. If you all look out the window, you'll see just how wild and cruel this weather is right now. But I'm warm and I've got my fire next to me and it's fine because I'm wearing my waterproof, so it's okay. Well, they travelled far. They travelled across great plains and over mountains until finally they came to a steep green hill. When they arrived at the steep green hill, our lassie slid down off the bear's back and the bear tapped on the side of the hill. And a door appeared, because that's what happens in fairy tales. The door appeared and they both stepped through and they found themselves, our lassie especially, in the most magnificent palace than she could ever have dreamt of. There were jewels all around, gold and silver hanging, and there was a table laid as if for a great feast. And the bear said, this now is your home. This is your home. You may eat, you may drink, you may do as you will. And if there is anything that you should need, all you must do is ring this tiny silver bell. And you will have all that you might have to your heart's content. Well, she thanked the bear and the bear left. She sat down at the table and she had something to eat and something to drink. And after a time, she began to feel sleepy. So, she went to ring the little bell. But scarce before her fingers had even touched it, she suddenly found herself stood, no longer in front of a table laid for a feast, but in front of the most magnificent bedchamber. And this had an enormous bed in the centre of the room with pillows and sheets as soft and silken as any you would wish to sleep upon, and a golden fringe all around the top. And she found herself feeling really quite tired, so she lay down on the bed and she turned out the light. But moments after she had turned out that light, a man came in and laid himself down beside her. For this was the white bear, who was a beast by day and a man by night. But she never saw him. She never got to see him because he was always up and off before the morning dawned. But, believe it or not, they lived happily like this for a time. But by and by, the days, the weeks, the months passed, and our lassie fell silent and sorrowful, for she missed her family. And one morning when she was sat weeping, the bear came and he asked her what the matter could be, and she said, if I could just return to my family for one day, if I could just see them for one day, I would feel so much happier. I am happy here, but just for one day I wish to see how they fare. And the bear agreed. He said, I will take you there if that will make you happy, but for one day only. And he said, I must ask, you do not find yourself in a room alone with your mother. You do not find yourself alone with her or listen to what she tries to tell you, tries to get you to do. For if you do, you will bring us both bad luck. I promise, she said. I promise I will not be alone with my mother. And so she climbed upon the bear's back and they returned to where her family lived. And they now lived in a great manor house. And as he set her down before it, they came out and they rushed to greet her, and there was much joy and there was much rejoicing. And in my head, I am there, and I think we're all there, because when this lockdown ends, we are going to be hugging and holding those people we love. And she went in with them, and they ate and they drank and they talked late into the night, but as is always the case, and after a time, the children fell asleep, and one by one they went to their beds. And our lassie, she found herself alone with her mother. Daughter of mine, her mother said, tell me truly, how is it that you live? You have heard how we are well, but of you we have heard nothing. I am well enough, she said. And she told her mother where she lived, what she had, how she wanted for nothing. But she also told her mother that every night when she went to bed, just after she turned out the light, a man came in and lay himself down beside her. But that she never got to see him, that he was always up and off before the morning dawned. Why, said her mother, this man you speak of, he could be a troll. This could be a troll you sleep with. Daughter of mine, I will give you this magic candle. You must take it back with you, and when next he falls asleep, you must light it and you must look upon his face. She listened to her mother, and she did as her mother asked. She took that candle and she hid it in her dress, and the very next day when the bear came to take her away, she had it tucked there, and as they rode across the plains and over the high mountains and back towards the steep green hill, the bear asked her, did you do as I asked you to? Did you not find time with your mother? Did you stay away? Did you manage somehow to always be with somebody else? Did you listen to her? And the lassie, she said, why no, I did as you asked. Well, as soon as they returned home, it was the same story over again. She could eat, she could drink, she could do whatever she liked. She could sleep in this wonderful bed with pillows as soft as silk and as any you would wish to sleep upon. But every night, when she went to bed just after she'd blown out that light, a man came in, her man, lay down beside her. She waited until he was breathing steadily and softly. And then she climbed out of bed and she went and found the magic candle. She took this candle, she lit it, and she leant over to look upon the face of the man that she had never seen. And as the light fell upon that face, she saw that he was the most beautiful man she could ever wish to be with. And she felt in that instant that she really must kiss him. And so she bent over and she went to kiss him. But as she did, 3 hot drops of tallow fell, burning him through his shirt and onto his chest, and he leapt out of bed screaming, "What is it that you have done? Why have you done this?" She fell to her knees and she said, "I am sorry, I did not mean to harm you, I just merely wanted to look at you." He said, "If you could have waited just 1 more month, we could have been together, but now all ties between us are snapped. For I am under a spell placed upon me by an evil troll queen, and now I must travel from here to a place that lies east of the sun and west of the moon. And thither you'll find it, late or never." "Wait," she said, "there must be something I can do." "There is nothing you can do," he said. Well, she said, "At least tell me where it is and I will come and find you." He said, "It lies east of the sun and west of the moon. You will never find your way there, and even if you did, it would be too late. When you wake, I will be gone, and you will be left here with nothing. I will be gone, the palace will be gone, and you will be wearing the rags that you wore when you first came here, and you will be all alone." And she wept, he wept, they wept together, but it was as he said. In the morning, when she woke, he was gone, the palace had gone, and she lay on a pile of rags in the middle of a deep, dark forest. Well, this is our lassie, and you'll remember her father loved her because she was brave and she was strong and she was full of a spirit of adventure. And she picked herself up and she dusted herself down and she started to walk, because she swore to herself that no matter how far away this place was, no matter what she had to do to get there, she would find her prince. She walked for a long while, and she walked a long, long way. But finally, she came to a crag. And under that crag sat an old hag, an old, old woman. And the old woman was playing with a golden apple. And the old woman greeted her. "Good day to you," she said, "young woman. What are you doing alone in the forest, wandering about?" And our lassie said, "I have lost my prince. I am on my way to seek him, to find him, to rescue him. Could you tell me where lies the castle east of the sun and west of the moon?" "I know not where that place is," the old woman replied, "and anyway, even if I did, thither you'll get there late or never. But you may have the loan of my horse and ride on to my next neighbour and take this golden apple as well, because I feel you'll be having need of it." So the lassie thanked her and rode on, and when she got to the next neighbour, she remembered what the old woman before had told her. She gave the horse a switch behind the left ear and off it trotted home. And this second woman was old as well and sat beneath a crag, a grey crag, and of course was another old hag. And this one said, "Are you the lassie that seeks the prince who's held captive in the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon?" And she replied, "I am. Do you know where to find this place?" And the old woman replied, "I do not. But you may take this golden carding comb, for I feel you may have need of it, and you may have the loan of my horse also. Just remember to give it a switch behind the left ear when you reach my neighbour, and it will come on home to me." Lassie was tired now, but she rode on to the final third crag with the final third hag. And she asked again, "Do you know where the castle lies east of the sun and west of the moon? And can you help me to find and rescue my prince?" Well, this old woman was spinning on a golden spinning wheel. And she said, "I do not know where this castle lies, but I believe if you go to the winds, they may have travelled as far as this place you say lies east of the sun and west of the moon. And you may take this golden spinning wheel, for I feel you may have need of it." Well, our lassie, with her golden apple, carding comb and spinning wheel, now went on to find the winds. And she first came across the east wind. And the east wind was blustering about, and she stood still and strong, and she said, "East wind, can you tell me where this castle lies, where I may find my prince, east of the sun and west of the moon?" And the east wind said, "I have blown about, but I have never blown thus far. Let us go to my sister, the south wind, for she may have done." But the south wind too didn't know where to find this castle, and suggested that maybe they went on to the west wind. And the west wind was breezy and easy, and again wasn't able to tell them where lay the castle east of the sun and west of the moon. But he did say that if she was brave enough, she could go to the north wind. "But mind," he said, "the north wind is angry and bitter and cruel, and he will not thank you for asking for his help." Well, she went. She went with the winds alongside her, and they all stood before the north wind, and she shouted as loudly as she could, "North wind, will you help me? I entreat you, please. I must get to the castle that lies east of the sun and west of the moon, and I believe you may know where that lies." And the north wind blasted icy, angry breaths back at her, said, "I once blew an aspen leaf thither, as far as you say, and I could not move for days afterwards. But are you brave?" And she said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Are you afraid?" "No, I am not," she replied. And so he said, "Well, climb upon my back then." And off they went. Oh, they whipped up such a storm. As they flew across the land, great tracts of forest fell, and as they flew across the sea, ships foundered by their thousands. But finally, after days and weeks of soaring through the sky, they came to the shore, whereupon lay the castle east of the sun and west of the moon. And the north wind cast her down upon the shore, and limped off to rest a while before breezing home. And our lassie found herself in front of a grey and gloomy walled castle, and she sat herself down by the door and she waited. Now she took out of her pocket the golden apple, and she sat for a while tossing it up and down, and after a time the casement window opened above her, and out leaned a really ugly looking troll. She had a nose 3 ells long. She had warts on her face. She had long fingernails, that sallow kind of skin that you have when you're a troll. And she sounded hideous. She sort of croaked out of the window, "What is that you have there?" And our lassie realised this must be a troll princess, the troll princess that the troll queen perhaps means to marry to her prince. And she thought quickly, and she replied, "It is not for sale for gold or money, but if I may have one night with the prince you hold captive here in this castle, you may have it." "Ah, 'tis easily done," replied the troll princess. And the doors were thrown open, and she snatched that apple, and she threw our lassie into the room where her prince was sleeping. Oh, he was sleeping. There was nothing she could do to wake him. She shook him, she shouted at him, she cried, she pleaded, she implored him to wake, but nothing would wake him at all. And then, when the morning dawned, she was dragged from that room and she was thrown back outside of the castle gates. But this is our lassie we're talking about. So, this time she got out her golden carding comb and she sat carding outside of those gates, those great gates. And it didn't take long before the casement window was thrown open once again, and our troll princess with the nose 3 ells long leant out, and she shouted, "What is that you now have there?" And our lassie replied, "It is not for sale for gold or money, but if I may have another night with the prince in the castle, well then maybe you can have it." "'Tis easily done," the troll princess replied, and she was dragged once more across the castle courtyard and thrown into the room with the prince. But again, he was fast asleep. The troll queen was clearly drugging him with some sort of sleeping potion, and he would not wake. Nothing she did. She poked him with things that she had on her that were sharp. She shook him, she shouted at him, but there was no way that he was waking, and in the morning she was dragged once more from the room and she was thrown outside of the castle gates. Well, she sat this time with the golden spinning wheel, and she waited. And sure enough, the princess with the nose 3 ells long hung out of the window and said, "What is that you have there?" And our lassie stood up and she said, "It is yours. It is yours for one final night with the prince that you hold captive here in this castle." And the troll princess, she smirked and she said, "'Tis nothing." She took that golden spinning wheel and she threw our lassie back into the room with the prince. But I need to tell you something, because during the day that our lassie was sat out of the front of the castle spinning on the golden spinning wheel, some poor innocent folk who were also held captive in the castle had heard her coming to this room with the prince the past 2 nights. And during the 3rd day, they had hammered on the walls and they had said to the prince while he was awake, "Whatever she is giving you, whatever the troll queen is giving you, do not drink it, for your lassie has come. She has come for you and you are sleeping." And so, this time, when our lassie was thrown into that room with the prince, this time he had not drunk anything that he was given during the day. He had thrown the potions that they had handed him and intended for him to drink away over his shoulder. He had feigned sleep. He had pretended to not be awake, so that when they looked in on him before they'd allowed the lassie in, they thought that he was when he was not. And of course, He opened his eyes, and she ran to him, and they held each other in their arms so tight, and there was much love between them all that night. And he said to her, "You have come just in the nick of time. For tomorrow I am to be wed by the evil troll queen to this troll princess with the nose 3 ells long. But now you are here, we can make a plan. For I shall say that I am only prepared to marry a woman who can wash these 3 stains of tallow wax out of my shirt. I must see what she is fit for, and this is what she must do. And they will see it all as a great game, and they will say that they can do it. They will believe that they can. But these are trolls, and they have hearts of darkness, and there's no way that they will be able to wash these 3 drops of tallow from my shirt. And then I will call for you, my love, and you will come, and you will be able to do it." "This is a good plan," she said. And so when the morning dawned and she was dragged from the room and she was thrown once more outside of the castle gates, she waited. Now it takes a long time to prepare for a troll wedding, a really long time. And so it was late in the day when finally the prince was dragged from his room. And they said to him, "Do you have anything that you want to say before you are married to our troll princess?" And the prince said, I have sworn only to marry the woman who can wash these 3 drops of wax from my shirt, for I must see what she is fit for." "Aha! 'Tis nothing," they replied. "Not a problem at all." And so they snatched and they ripped and they tried to tear it from his hands. And of course the troll queen won. She handed it to her daughter. Her daughter picked it up and her daughter took it over to the washing well and began to try and wash out these 3 drops of tallow. But no matter how hard she washed, no matter how much she rubbed and she scrubbed that shirt, she could not get the 3 drops of tallow out. And actually, the shirt was getting blacker and blacker and blacker until it was almost as if it had been shoved up a chimney. And it was just at that moment that the prince stepped forward and said, "Why, none of you are worth a straw." For they had snatched it and they too had tried, all of the trolls. No one could get it whiter. It was now as black as night. "None of you are worth a straw," he said. "I will call for a beggar lassie that sits outside right now. I will call her in and I'll be sure that she can get these 3 drops of tallow out of my shirt." And so he called for her and she came. And she took the shirt from him, for he had snatched it off those trolls, who by now were so angry, leaping about, shouting and screaming, but waiting to see if she was able to indeed clean this shirt that was now filthy. And as she took it in her hands, it began to turn whiter than white, white and as pure as the driven snow. And this made the trolls very, very angry. And they began to roil and bubble and they were angry. And as they stood on the spot there, suddenly without warning, the troll queen burst. Blood and pus everywhere. And then each troll after her, bursting one by one, showering everyone in the most grotesque of liquids and fluids. It was hideous. And then suddenly, our lassie and her prince, well, they find themselves stood alone in the courtyard of the castle. And by now the sky is alight with 1,000 stars and the torches on the walls are burning brighter than they've ever burned before. And our lassie, she turns to her prince and she says, "Come, let us go. Let us find the poor innocent folk that were there for us in our time of need. Let us release them, but let us go. Let us fly. Let us find some horses and ride. Let us leave, my love, never to return, to start our new life, our our own life, far, far away from this castle that they call east of the sun and west of the moon. And there ends my longer fairy tale, which I haven't looked at the time, but I'm sorry, I've gone massively over time. I've gone 10 minutes over my 50 minutes. But I hope that doesn't matter, and I hope you don't mind. And I just want to say that the reason that I shared that story is probably really obvious to you now. You know, this is a story where you can escape. This is a story where, you know, sure, you can look at the universal truths that sort of sit within it, these kind of things that we recognise in people as humans, and we can pick it apart and we can say, oh, this represents this represents that. But right now, I'm not interested in any of that analysis. I'm just interested in the fact that here is a woman who, despite everything, comes out on top. You know, she makes choices where she's frightened, but she's brave, and she just carries on, even though relentlessly everything is going wrong for her. And she wins. She wins. And she gets to go. And she gets to leave this place where they've been imprisoned, and she gets to start afresh. And I'm really hoping that that is what this year is going to bring us. You know, that we find this escapism in the story now, but that actually, you know, we can channel that empowerment. We can feel empowered by it. We can channel her strength and her courage, and we can emerge just like she does out of this stronger and better and ready to grab things and, you know, take the bull by the horns. It is actually the 20th of January, as everyone knows, but now this is the English teacher in me combining with the bushcraft and the outdoor instructor, combining with the storyteller. On the 20th of January, you sit between the birch tree and the rowan tree in the Celtic Ogham calendar. The Ogham script is very ancient, it's very old, almost like a runic script. And over time, people have assigned certain trees and lunar phases to each of the letters. And for each month, there's a tree and a letter. And in January, on the 20th, we move from birch to rowan. Now, birch. This is my broom that I made with the kids out of birch. Birch is used to cleanse, to clear out. You might have heard people beating the bounds, where they sweep out the old, they cleanse the area so that they may get ready for new life, the new beginning, the new start. And the rowan tree stands for that, with its beautiful red berries later on in the year. And on the 20th, we're sitting right there in between the birch, which is cleansing, which is cleaning, which is clearing, and the rowan, which is promising new life and a new beginning and a new start. And I hope that you feel that, and I hope that I can gift that knowledge to you, and that makes you feel happy and hopeful and strong. And I'm going to go now, and I'm going to go inside, and I'm going to have a hot cup of tea, and I'm going to change into some dry clothes, because my shelter over my head, which is my garden umbrella, has been blown by the wind slightly to one side, which is why the rain started falling on me when I was telling the story. But nothing else seems to have gone wrong, so I'm pleased about that. I'm just going to glance down here and just see if anyone's asked me any questions or anything. Oh no, people seem really pleased. Thank you so much. I look forward to reading through these later. A massive thank you to Somerset Storyfest, to Michael for having me on. You've got to look it up, people. Just look back at the videos, watch them. There's some incredible storytellers that I adore watching, that I learn so much from. And I've mentioned people that I follow, that I learn from as well, podcasts I listen to, books that I've read. I just want to leave you again with that quote. You know, that quote that says, the modern world still holds on to its magic if you can just attune yourself to its enchantments. Thank you very much, and have a lovely evening, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Bye-bye.